Hello, everyone, and welcome to the People-Driven Solution Resource Launching event organized by the Institute for Development Studies and Terre des Hommes Foundation. My name is Blair Daspahiu, and I am the head of the Child Protection Sector in Terre des Hommes. I would like to thank you for the participation today and for the interest you have shown in this event. So the purpose of this event is to introduce you to the CLARISSA program and to the learning and reflection resource for development and humanitarian practitioners that was born out of it. We would like to also give the space to interactively engage with the different topics in this resource and their added value to development and humanitarian practitioners. Lastly, we would like also to give the opportunity for those who might want to explore further by using the resource with your teams on the ground and joining a learning platform around it. This resource and the learning that emerged from CLARISSA project are of significant importance for Terre des Hommes. Children and youth participation and empowerment is at the heart and a key strategic pillar of Terre des Hommes strategy 2025-2028. TDH is also finalizing the child participation and empowerment framework, and the deep participation approach and learning from CLARISSA project will be a building block of this framework, which will enable Terre des Hommes to promote meaningful child and youth participation and empowerment, not only in its programs everywhere in the world, but also in the governance of the organization. I would now like to give the floor to Marina to also say a few words for the opening remarks of this event, and also to take us through the agenda of this event. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Berta. And hi, everybody. My name is Marina Abka, and I'm based at the Institute of Development Studies. So I would also like to offer a warm welcome to everybody joining us. It's great to see so many of you. Take a moment, if you'd like, to put your name and where you're zooming in from in the chat, if you'd like to. It's always good to get a sense of who else is in the room. And so, as Berta says, today we're going to be launching this resource. It's for us at IDS, it's really exciting to be able to do this in collaboration with Terre des Hommes and our other CLARISSA partners, because often as researchers, we don't actually get to be part of this moment, which is really pushing through into the practice and seeing like what are the actual implications of the work and how does it live on beyond the program. So for us, that's really, really exciting. And we're grateful to be able to do that with our partners. So what we're going to do today is that you're going to hear first from Danny Burns, who was the director of CLARISSA. And so he's going to tell us a little bit about the program overall, and especially focus on why was it unique as a program. Then you're going to hear from Lucy Hillier, who is the author of the resource that we're launching today. So Lucy's going to give you an overview of the resource itself. And then, as Berta said, we're going to have some good amount of time for you to really get to know the practitioners that are behind all of the learning that is synthesized in this resource. So you'll have the opportunity to select which breakout room, so which theme you want to focus on, and Lucy will explain that when we get to that stage. And then you're going to have a chance to really talk to people who were doing the work, right? So you can really get a sense of what did it feel like to work in this way. And then we'll have a chance to quickly wrap up at the end. So you might have noticed that we are in a Zoom meeting space. We're not in a webinar space, and that's because we wanted to have the opportunity for interaction, so we needed the breakout room function. That means that we've got quite a lot of people on the call, so we really appreciate it if you could all mute. And as most of you, I think, have done, is keeping your videos off while people are speaking. Obviously, when you get to the breakout rooms, please put your videos on and please speak and please interact. But just to manage the process as people are speaking. The other thing to say is that there isn't a Q&A function. So please use the chat. We'll monitor the chat throughout, and we'll have an opportunity after the breakout rooms to really come together and engage with anything, any questions or comments that have come through the chat, and we'll have a bit of an opportunity for some dialogue there. So I think that's it in terms of our housekeeping. Technical team, if I've missed anything, please shout. So I think if that's everything, we can get moving into our content. So I'm going to hand over to Judith, who's going to first play for us a short video to get us into the Clarissa mood. So Judith, over to you.
While participation and child-centeredness are at the core of all our work in terrorism, we were quite intrigued by CLARISSA's unique approach. It allowed us to do participation at greater depth, scale, and length to further refine those practices. I'm Jenny Afros. I work as the Deputy Country Representative and Head of Programs for Terrorism in Bangladesh, and worked as Country Coordinator for CLARISSA Bangladesh. It was inspiring for me to be part of this process and to learn that with trust, time, and supportive relationship, children could engage in deep participatory work, unearth evidence, take action, and find solutions for problems that affect their lives. Being part of CLARISSA has been a transformative journey for me. It emphasized the value of child-led initiatives and sparked curiosity in us to learn more from children's experiences. Join forces with agencies like Terrorism and Institute of Development Studies to the launching event to understand how to do deep participation in systemic action research.
Okay, thank you. So as Marina said, I'm Danny Burns and I was director of the CLARISSA program. And my role here really is to provide some context to the resource that has been developed. So what was the program? What did it do? How did it try to do things differently? So CLARISSA was well, I should maybe say something about what CLARISSA means. CLARISSA stands for Child Labour Action Research Innovation in South and Southeast Asia. It was a 5-year program focused on the worst forms of child labour in specifically urban areas. And the children involved were mostly between 12 and 18, although there were a few that were younger and a few that were older who'd been through child labour experiences. It was a large program, around 10 million UK pounds. But you can see it as a collection of lots and lots of pieces, all of which might be relevant at different scales. It focused on the leather sector in Bangladesh and on the adult entertainment sector in Nepal. Initially, in fact, there was a program in Myanmar, but we had to end it as a result of both the coup and COVID and cuts. And it is worth noting that COVID obviously was a feature of the program throughout and part of what had to be managed and was obviously quite complex and difficult. CLARISSA was neither really a research program, which might be more classically IDS, or an implementation program, which might be more classically in the NGO world. It was a hybrid which was really focused on innovation. And it came out of a program funded by the FCDO called Aid Connect, which was really looking at different, more innovative ways of doing sort of larger programs. We used a method which I've been developing over a number of years called systemic action research, which is a form of participatory action research which can operate at scale and which is focused on trying to build systemic outcomes rather than perhaps sort of individual changes which might not have a systemic effect. And I'll say a bit more about that later. But our aim was really to explore how to open pathways to systemic change and to think about how they could be sustained if possible or scaled if possible. But our essential aim was to open up those pathways and explore how they could be generated. What made CLARISSA different was we used action research as the implementation modality. So we didn't use a classic planning model, which was then devolved down to teams who took the plans and managed them in a classic rollout sort of way. It was a continuous learning process which generated evidence, turned that evidence into action, took action, learned from the action, generated new evidence that took us in new directions and so on. So action research was the modality for implementation. The second thing which made it different was, in fact, its focus on systemic change. And then the third thing which I wanted to pick out really, which has been very much my life's work, has been to do participatory action research on a large scale. There's a lot of work which is called participatory, which is on a small scale, which is amazing, rich work. And whenever anything that's called participatory goes to a large scale, it often gets really diffused into something which is like a sort of a mush of consultation. And what we were trying to do is maintain the depth and quality of participation across a large program. We used multiple and parallel participatory methods to generate knowledge. I'll say something more about that in a minute. And we used a participatory adaptive management approach as, if you like, a meta-level action research process to hold the whole of the program. There were multiple partners, and I won't name them all now, but obviously they included TDH and Child Hope and Voices for Children and Graham Bangla and IDS and various others, Consortium for Street Children, and many names that you'll be familiar with, others on the ground. So we used a whole variety of methods to generate knowledge. And again, the scale of this was quite important. We started with 400 life stories of children in each country, so 800 in all. Those were analyzed in two ways. So the children did an analysis, which you will hear much more of, which was a very deep systemic causal analysis of all of the factors that were embedded in the story. So you've got 800 stories. They might be 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 pages long. The children worked together in pairs. They pulled out the factors, they analyzed what was in them, and they drew their conclusions from them. An absolutely amazing analysis. We also did a parallel qualitative analysis, which pulled out some of the rich quotes and so on that could be used both in the groups later and which could also be used for write-ups and so on at VSU. We ran 13 action research groups in each country in parallel. So the action research groups were chosen out, and they came out of the life story analysis, which the children did. And they included everything from working on workplace conditions to working with small businesses on how they might engage with child labor, to working on family violence and the ways in which that flows into child labor. And you can look at all of these. All of these are on the website, and you can see an individual account, maybe a sort of a 10-page account of every one of these 26 action research groups. Other sorts of work we did was we did sort of shadowing and support and accompanying work where you followed the day in the life of a child. We shadowed small businesses. These are sort of small businesses in the informal economy that are mostly employing the children. We did more classic research work, surveys and interviews. We did photo voice work. A lot of this you can see on a website, which Marina will highlight again later, called Hard Labor, hardlabor.info, where a lot of the stories and the detailed pictures of what came out are there. I wanted to just say a few words about systemic change. We wanted to do something which changed the ways in which people think, the ways in which people act, the patterns which drive child labor, rather than focus on one aspect and changing that. Within this sector, a large number of initiatives are focused on some version of rescue, but you can rescue 20 children or 100 children or 1,000 children, and if the conditions are exactly the same within those locations, then there'll be another 10 or 100 or 1,000 people just to replace them. So you've got to change the dynamic. We know also, for example, in these sectors, that some big policy initiatives have just simply failed because they haven't really understood the systemic dynamics. So in Nepal, we saw the way in which the banning of the cabin restaurants diffused the problems which were related particularly to the sex industry into the small eateries, the Kajagar, which became a big focus of our work. Similarly, in the leather sector, the creation of a new industrial area, which was supposed to clean up the leather sector, just created a new informal economy around that new industrial area. So these sorts of policy processes don't necessarily have the impact unless you can really think about, the nature of the systemic change that you want to create. And it's very difficult when what we discovered very quickly, the children are really employed in small businesses in the informal sector to have any sort of international policy levers. A lot of the work in this space is around corporate social responsibility and impact on supply chains, but actually most of the work's happening in tiny, small businesses that technically don't exist. So just a small flavor of some of the things that resulted from the action research groups. And just to say, so these action research groups were created across all of these themes. They may each have had maybe, 15, 20 meetings, exploring issues together, generating new evidence, generating theories of change about what might happen if they do this and that, taking action, looking at what happened, changing the action, monitoring what they were doing, and so on. And this resulted in quite significant changes in how parents saw their relationship to children. It saw big changes in how small businesses saw their responsibilities towards children. And 3 of those 13 groups in each country were with small businesses. With businesses, for example, taking responsibility for monitoring other businesses across their sector, and this in a context where an inspection regime is more or less meaningless because there just aren't enough inspectors to engage with all of these sorts of locations. And in any case, you have all the unintended consequences that I was just describing if you just try to close down a business and so on. There were very big changes in the way schools engaged with working children. So working children said, we want to have an education, and they started working with small businesses to engage with schools, and schools started to say, okay, we can think of different ways in which you can come into the school, be supported with books, change the timetables, reduce discrimination, and so on and so forth, so that the working children started to feel that it was possible to have an education alongside their work. And bearing in mind, these are children in the worst forms of child labor, almost all of whom are forced to work because if they don't work, their families have no food to eat. There were changes in very practical things like how the uses of safety equipment were perceived and built out. There were changes in infrastructure with, bathrooms and washing facilities being built so that particularly the girls had spaces where they could go when they were working. There were other infrastructure changes like places where children could be so they weren't seen to be idle, inverted commas, by their parents, and that changed the nature of the way the parents saw their children and so on. This really is a bit of a whistle-stop tour and a very sort of summary process, but I just wanted to highlight a few pieces of learning at the end of all of this. One is that on a process side, children can carry out extraordinarily complex analysis. They can generate creative strategies which amplify their agency. And in many respects, the work that children did far surpassed anything I've seen that professional researchers do and can do. The second, which is really important, is that we have a methodology now to engage with small businesses in the informal economy. And often it's very difficult. You think, okay, there's 10,000 businesses. What do we do? How do we engage with them? This action research process worked really well. And then it started to ripple out. So the group took responsibility and they spread it out to other businesses. And we became clear that the way in which we'd modeled adaptive management within this process as an action research process was the only way in which we could manage a program of this complexity with that deep learning and participation. And then just a few points, very, very few. I mean, there's literally hundreds on the sort of learning that we got. I mean, one key thing was that we needed to focus on small businesses in the informal economy serving domestic markets. And that really involved a complete shift in the focus of the debate. The second, related to these small businesses, is that, very few of these businesses could be seen as perpetrators in the way that we normally construct them. The people running them were often child laborers themselves once. They're only one rung up the poverty ladder from the people that they were hiring, if at all. And they often think they're supporting children by giving them work. So there was a real opportunity there in engaging with them to think about, how things could be done differently. I just wanted to end really by saying that, many of the countries that we work in, including these two, have actually quite good laws on child labor. But if the economic system incentivizes child labor, then it will continue. In the Bangladesh leather sector, for example, we identified that there were children working in 104 out of 107 processes within the leather supply chain. They're very diffuse. That's my timer, so I will end there in a minute. They're very diffuse. There's just one or two working in each of the businesses. It's a cultural norm, and the businesses need those children in order to survive. If there's 107 processes within the sale of a single shoe, which might just be a few dollars, then you can imagine how tiny those margins are and how critical it is that those businesses get cheap labor. If you don't change the economic system, then you won't change anything by changing the law. So this is why these sorts of systemic changes are necessary. So I'm going to end there. It's a bit of a flavor rather than a comprehensive analysis. You can get the comprehensive analysis on the CLARISSA website, but we'll come to that later. So Lucy, over to you to present the resource. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. I'm just going to share my screen. So thanks everyone for joining and for taking the time to listen to this. This is going to be a very brief overview of this resource because the main time is going to be spent actually speaking with quite a few of the people who are involved in implementing this on the ground. So I wanted to show you this big picture from CLARISSA. I don't know how it makes you feel when you look at it, but when I first joined the CLARISSA team, which was quite late on in the process, I looked at quite a few pictures like this and I felt quite a mixture of emotions. I thought, wow, look at this complicated map. It's huge, it's complex. How am I ever going to understand this? And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, children made this. And if they can understand it, I probably can too. And I also thought, gosh, how amazing, children. And let's not forget, like Danny said, children who are normally at work, they're not always at school. They made this really deep and sophisticated kind of collective map that shows how the different aspects of their lives combine to drive them into and keep them in some of the worst forms of child labor. So then I thought, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? Here I am, an outsider, coming in towards the end of a really ambitious research project, which has been implemented for at least 4 years over COVID as well, in 2 different countries, lots of diverse partners, hundreds of children and adults participating, and a huge volume of academic and other outputs that are sort of coming out around all these different threads. And my job was to try and turn this into something practical that people like myself could actually use. So that's where I found myself at the beginning of this people-driven solutions story. And in fact, despite my initial fears, it turned into quite an amazing journey of discovery. And even though I've actually been working on participatory community-led child protection for many years, I think through doing this resource, I really learned new ways of thinking about challenges for children and what can be done about them, and also new approaches and tools which can really deepen that participatory work with children. So I'm hoping that just by telling you a bit about this little story about the journey that I went on with the CLARISSA team, that we went on together, can perhaps be useful today for you if you're here listening. You're also an outsider in a way, just like I was, kind of looking in and wanting to get a better understanding of this CLARISSA project and what systemic action research is really all about, and how it perhaps could strengthen the work that you might already be doing in the child protection arena or perhaps in another sector. So at the beginning of this story, back in 2023, we agreed we didn't want to write just another toolkit or maybe something on child participation or child-led research, because we knew there were quite a lot of those kinds of resources already around. But we did decide we wanted to do something that would highlight what was unique and special about the way CLARISSA had approached this work. And we really wanted to encourage and help other teams or programs or organizations to learn about this approach in relation to their own programs and contexts, and decide, perhaps if and how it could help them strengthen the way they were working. And so we decided to develop a kind of learning and reflection resource, is what we called it. And it's designed to be undertaken together as a group. So it's not a training manual, it's not a step-by-step how-to guide, and it's not a guide on how to become an academic researcher. What it actually is, and I think I have to move, oh no, I'll move in a minute. What it is a set of 6 thematic briefs, each with its own video, that introduces key CLARISSA aspects and approaches, and helps teams learn collectively and then reflect on how these key approaches could strengthen their own work. So here's a little overview, and there's not much writing I'm doing on this quick presentation, but there are 6 aspects which were the CLARISSA highlights, and you can see them on the right there from section 1 to section 6. And these are designed to really help strengthen any kind of program, not just child protection. I won't read them all out because it takes a bit of time. But each brief asks team members to watch a video, and there's a video made for each section that you can access through the resource, and then discuss a set of questions together as a team. Once you've done a bit of reading and watched the video. And this is really the beginning of a brainstorming session to help teams start to contextualize the approach in their own work. And you can decide to work in your own time. You can do it week by week, perhaps month by month. And at the end, teams have a chance to revisit their ideas and decide which aspects they want to take further, perhaps which are the most important, the most relevant, or the most feasible. So this is just a little collage of pictures. Each brief has evidence. It has evidence from CLARISSA, a video. It has guidance on key skills, like things like building trust or facilitating without judging. It often has lists of do's and don'ts just to help you, stories from the field, and also really great project photos that kind of demonstrate how things looked, what participants made and produced. And there's also lots of links within each section. So if you do decide to go deeper into that area of work, you can actually follow those links and get more guidance. So maybe if you are somebody listening now, this is a very useful resource, I would say, for the kinds of things like strengthening meaningful deep participation. Also, if you're interested in ownership by participants or local people of work, if you're interested in shifting power or strengthening people and child-led programming, also maybe thinking about reducing dependency on actors coming in and solving problems for local people and children. And I think the 3 at the bottom are probably the ones I really wanted to highlight. And Danny talked about this, but finding new and sustainable ways to really address a problem. The systems approach, the systemic approach, makes you look at the whole system, not just an issue, which I think is helpful for those of us who feel a bit stuck trying to work on some issues. Also, the use of participatory approaches and learning in real time and changing the way that you're running a project in real time, not just aiming towards a set of objectives and outcomes that you hope maybe were right when you guessed them at the beginning. And I think another thing that often gets overlooked is we do all work in partnership with very diverse other partners. And the work that CLARISSA did around this, and how can you work effectively in a more diverse, sort of equitable way and sort of work collectively, has been, I think, for me, very sort of interesting and something I learned a lot about. So that's really kind of the overview of what this resource is all about. It's very short. I think the main event is to meet some of the practitioners in the breakout groups, which you're going to have a chance to do now, and they'll give you a sort of first-hand account of what they learned, and you'll be able to ask them lots of questions. So here's a little instruction. You're going to see a pop-up on your screen, which will ask you to choose a room. You can choose one that sounds interesting to you. You've got a list of 4 rooms below you. If you don't choose a room, we'll just allocate one to you. So I think you've got about half an hour to have a really nice chat with the facilitators, who are implementers from Bangladesh and Nepal, and we're all part of CLARISSA. So thanks very much for that, and have fun chatting.
Hello, welcome back, everybody. We sucked back into the main room. So hopefully you had a bit of a chance to hear from the work on the ground, and also maybe ask some questions or share some reflections from your own experiences. What we'd like to do now is just hear very briefly from each of the rooms, particularly anything that was really inspiring that came up in the conversation in relationship to the specific areas of the resource that you were discussing. So maybe we can start with the first group, Ranjana, Kushum, not sure who wants to share some thoughts on your discussion around working in a child and people-centered way.
Thank you, Marina. In our group, we didn't had much of a chance to discuss in a whole group, but at least I had quite an interesting example shared by Alice, like how they are also working with the street children and all that. But the issues and risks like they are also facing was convincing the local governments or the authorities, and which was quite difficult for them because the authorities do not want to get changed. So she asked us how we engaged in CLARISSA with the local authorities and what sort of example we had. So that was quite an interesting similarity that we found. And one question was asked to us at the end of the session, during the end of the session, was how they want to engage with the youth-led initiatives and projects. So how our child-led in a child-centered approach can be used in that youth-led, but the time was limited, so I could not answer that. Hopefully, during the conversation, you all can answer that also. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Ranjana. Do you want to take just 30 seconds, 1 minute to answer that?
I have shared, actually, we have lots of resources on this website that we are going to launch, and the activities that we have done. So if there is anything particular he wants to, or sorry, she wants to ask, like then we can also get connected through the email and talk about it more.
Great, thanks very much, Ranjana. Great. So how about our second group? That was, I think it was quite a big group, talking about mapping systems and taking action, one of the more innovative aspects of the systemic action research. Who would like to feed back?
I wonder if it might actually be better to invite any of the participants to see if there was any inspirational moments or, or moments of, oh my God. Anyone in the group want to say something?
I can say I think it was incredible. I had experience in the past of participatory analysis, but I think the quantity and the volume of things you did with the young people, 14 to 18 years old, you said they were, to me was impressive that in 4 days they can get to a big systemic thing, because I think the smaller maps are easier to create, or the problem trees, but the big systemic thinking is I would say it can take professionals months. So it's really incredible that young people got to that point. And that's why later on I asked questions on how the businesses and the government reacted, because in a way they are mapping the solutions for them. So it's more is that uptake of their thinking. But yeah, I just think you have done incredible work, and I wish more people would do the work this way in the sector.
One thing that is just worth reflecting on that is that, the children do all of this work, but unless the policymakers engage with it, then they don't really know or understand what's happening. So they're, ideally within a wider systemic process, a big part of the process is linking people together, like we link the businesses and the children together, or linking the children and the schools and the businesses, but linking policymakers, so that they can actually hear the children describe their analysis rather than reading a report about it, and then engage with the children becomes really quite important in this. So that we talk about that as intentional networking, but it's quite an important part in systemic change that we do that deliberately rather than just somehow expect the policymakers just to stumble across these pieces of work and understand them.
Great, thanks very much, Soledad and Danny. Maybe just also to point you to, and in a minute I can put it in the chat, but as part of the evaluation of the program, we actually looked at child-led advocacy. So one of the areas that we were interested in is understanding if indeed that engagement of children with decision makers would make a difference in what way. And so there's some evidence there about how that process worked. That we can also point you to. Great. Okay, so maybe we can move on to the third group. So Kriti and Sukanta were talking about the after action reviews, and it was quite a big topic actually, because it was both about some of the tools used like AARs and also the whole participatory adaptive management process. So anybody in that group want to reflect back?
May I
Yes.
take this?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was wonderful sharing, Sukanta, he explained how we did this, what were our phases of action after action reviews, in the ground and country level and consortium level, how we actually practiced this and how we adopted those learning with some examples. We tried to share our learnings initially. And after that, there were very less time for the room discussion. However, we could get some questions regarding resistance. Was there any resistance in the community or the government level while doing the actions or the process of CLARISSA? So we shared a couple of examples. There were not exactly in Bangladesh perspective. Also there was how we tackled those issues, and from Nepal also how we did it. Initially the business owners' trust was not there while forming the action research groups, but gradually the 3-month time for the trust building, relationship building, all those processes gradually supported not only sharing their experiences, but also trusting in a level where they can share the real picture of this adult entertainment sector, how children are being exploited, what business owners actually go through, all these things where they were able to share. So yes, there were some of the resistance, but in spite of that, the approach of program and the adaptation, that pace, that room for adaptation, those all supported us so well that we could get easy and overcome the challenges. So this we shared, and similarly, it was also appreciated, without the log frame, how that budget was used in a proper way. That this is a perfect example that was shared by the participant also. So I think yeah, in a very few time we shared within whatever is covered within this chapter, like action review, how did we do, and then the learning processes. Yes, thank you. Anything did I miss, Sukanta? You can add on.
Yeah,
I was also there.
Just 2 points, Kriti. And I think that one of our colleagues mentioned that after action reviews itself was a kind of a inspiring process. Yeah, so that how rigorous we were to to kind of to invest our time and resource onto learning. Kind of like it was a kind of a helpful process for us, and there was also a thought that does this affection review approach can be easily transferred to other programs. Like it can be like child protection or whatever programs. Yeah. uh, and there was also one more comment that it can be useful if this resource and thoughts can be shared to a wider stakeholders and also donors, because it can be attractive for them too to understand that kind programs can also work like that. One of my colleague that I also worked with in CLARISSA, he also was there, although he left CLARISSA. And some months ago, he shared that affection review was something that helped him to see things differently. So itself, the approach was really inspiring for him. I think that's all I wanted to tell, Marina.
Thanks very much, Sukanta. Yeah, I think the point about how scalable a tool like an after action review was very well made, in the sense that CLARISSA was a very large program, but actually there are elements of tools that are in this resource, or aspects of them that are very much applicable in smaller projects or programs that you might be involved in. Great. So moving on to our final group, working with partners. Who would like to share back? Ginia, am I handing?
Briefly, we didn't have much time for discussion, but yeah, one feedback that we got was how important it is to have flexibility in terms of doing participatory work and partnership in a program which requires deep participation. And also another colleague shared how important it is to work. It is important to have collaboration with the government partners as well when we are doing, and it can be critical. So it's important to have the push from everyone's side to ensure that we have government's ownership in the process. And there was a question which I could not respond to that. Maybe I will take the opportunity, where the question was, where is the end of this analysis? What did you do? Actually, what we did after the analysis of the life story collection and analysis process was we set up participatory action research groups. So in both Bangladesh and Nepal, we had 26 action research groups, and a large number of it were set up and run by the children themselves. And some of it are, the structure and setup is there. So some of the groups are self-organizing and continuing even when we are not there, and they have been connected with other actors within their community. So that is, I think, a quick response to that. But we have detailed reports in the CLARISSA global website. I think if colleagues can visit who are interested, can get some more insights into that. And if we have a minute or so, I think if anyone else from the group would like to share any other insight, maybe you can take a minute.
Okay, I have not raised up my hand, but I'm John Bosco Okaya from Uganda, and I really like the robust approach, because from the action research now coming to adaptive management, where consortiums, but of course linear and approach where system level change, social complex issues are handled, community-based organization, global think tank, local partners, and also people directly affected, really gave in a very powerful hierarchical flexibility, and collective decision making is something that I was able to pick, and I think it's a very powerful, systems that can robustly, work, and of course contextual issues, and then it is flourished. So thank you so much. That is what I could be able to share as a person who was in the group. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Okaya. That's actually a very nice summary of a lot of what we said. Martin's just put a question in the chat around how we managed the partnerships within CLARISSA, particularly how we worked with across the different actors. I don't know if Ginia or anybody else who was in that group, or Lucy, maybe want to share any quick reflections on that, responses?
I can briefly add a few points. So Martin, in our consortium, we had a very good structure in place, both at the global level, including participants, members from the country offices, organizations based in the countries, and also at the country level. So I think that were, I mean, usual consortium partnership structures are there, but in our case, I think it was important that the decision-making process was more participatory in those forums, and it was more transparent and inclusive in the design of it. So we had, for example, alongside governance structure like the strategic boards or the country operations team, we also had process design team that we called, where the technical people or the implementers who are part of the design process used to sit in that meeting in every 2 weeks to discuss about the design of different methods, approaches, tools, so which is empowering. It was it ensured that it's not at all top down, rather it's more horizontal, because you know, I mean, ideas was there, what the think tank and the academia with the research expertise, but it was felt by all of us who are implementers working closely with the local actors. We've saw the value. We saw how we were valued in terms of using the local expertise, and the knowledge was not up there. It was, I think, across horizontally across the partners. So I think that was really empowering experience for us, and it is not something that we always see in a partnership program. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Ginia. Maybe it's worth just also mentioning that we actually made reflection and learning about how the partnership was working part of our monitoring and evaluation system of the program. We had a partnership rubric that we applied periodically. So the discussion of how are we managing and navigating power in our partnership, etc., was actually central to the management conversations of the program, which I don't think is always the case, right? We have partnerships to do the work, but not to actually reflect on how we're doing the partnership.
The other thing that's worth saying is that the evolution of those fora was also part of the adaptive management process. So that, you know, we didn't have some of the groups at the beginning because we didn't foresee the need for them. And the initial groups, which were structured around key themes, became the process design group, the evaluation group, the thematic research group, and so on. And, you know, all of the practitioners that were involved, so it could be 20 or 30 or 40 people might be in some of those meetings and would discuss those as I hope, as equals, to come to collective solutions to all of the issues that were there. And one thing that was was particularly useful in the sort of the last third or maybe the last half of the program was a mentoring group that was created, where we worked with the ground level facilitators and documenters who literally sort of threw up the problems that were emerging on the ground every day. And then they were teased out and explored and discussed by peers and by us and by, you know, anyone in the group to say, okay, well, maybe you could try this, or we've tried that there, or, you know, actually in another program, we might have done it like this. So there was a sort of a 2-weekly learning process that sort of was very ground-based, because it was rooted in, okay, I've got a problem now and it looks like this.
Great. Thanks very much, Danny. So I think with that, I mean, there is so much in this amazing resource that Lucy did this brilliant job of making sense of and pulling together and finding the little gems. And obviously we've shared in the chat, and we'll keep sharing the various sites that have many of the papers produced by CLARISSA. But hopefully this has given you a bit of a taster, and kind of you're excited to go and look at the resource and maybe apply it in your own work. So as we wrap up, I wanted to hand back over to Blerta for any final thoughts. It's really, I mean, I think it's inspirational to hear how TDH has been doing this work and wanting to deepen it. So yeah, any final thoughts from you?
Of course. But thank you very much, Marina, and thanks to all the colleagues who shared the learnings and also worked so hard to put this event together. Obviously, at Terre des Hommes, we have already started to use the approach and the methodology in various projects on the ground. And they're actually working very well. So we really encourage everyone to really go to the resource and use it and see how different tools and methodologies can be actually embedded in their current projects and activities that are going on. Just to reflect a bit on what was said during the webinar, I think we heard about people-led solutions, people-led programming, and child and youth-led programs. And it is clear from the evidence provided from CLARISSA that through this methodology and approach, we actually can facilitate deep participation of children, of young people, of adults that can really strengthen this type of programs. They can also foster intergenerational participation, and they also can promote and support shifting power to local people, to children, and to the marginalized groups. So this is the first reflection and something that I think we take away from this webinar. And it helps as well to see how we can really utilize all this rich learning and approaches to make, to make a lasting impact at the end of the day for the work that we do as practitioners. It also shows as well that this kind of methodologies are ways to definitely reduce dependency from external development, external aid, especially international development and humanitarian aid. And at least at Terre des Hommes, we're very keen to take this forward and to see, how we can promote it more and better and really use it in our programs, but also share with our partners everywhere we work and support each other to, enrich the learning because of using these approaches further. In addition to that, I would like to also say that CLARISSA, as Danny was also mentioning, it didn't bring together only children and young people who were the experiential children, the ones involved in child labor. It was also one of those methodologies that brought together children, young people, and business owners as well to work out solutions, to understand the root causes of the problems. So basically, it is an example of how these locally owned and people-driven solutions can actually bring on board all the stakeholders, including the private sector stakeholders, who can be part of the solution and we believe should be part of the solution to the issues that we face today in the world, including the issue of child labor. So, and all the issues of when it comes to the violation of children's rights. So therefore, at Terre des Hommes, we are promoting the people-driven solutions methodology in our child rights and business work. And then as a last point, I would like to say that we have just launched the initiative on decolonization and localization of mental health and psychosocial support in Terre des Hommes. And the empowerment of children and young people is a pillar of Terre des Hommes' MHPSS framework. So actually within this initiative on decolonization and localization of MHPSS, we would like to see and to explore how the learning from CLARISSA and the methodology of CLARISSA as well can inform and inspire these initiatives as well, and can bring various stakeholders to generate practices and solutions that actually challenge existing power imbalances and promote transformational power sharing within MHPSS. So with this, I hope, that these reflections and these points and everything that was shared today, including the links that are in the chats from our colleagues, are going to help everybody to be inspired from this learning and from this work, but also to see how you can practically start using those learnings and those methodologies and become a part of this community of people who are contributing to this collective learning. So thank you very much for everything, and thank you for the participation as well. Marina, is over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Blerta. And yeah, inspiring, as I say, to hear the extent to which TDH is committed to this. From IDS, just to say that we chose to house this resource on our Participatory Methods website, which is a site that's owned by the participation research team at IDS. And that's because we are committed to the ongoing learning about how these methodologies actually work in practice. So we're very, very open to having a feedback loop with all of you interested in taking this forward. The survey that Judith has put in the chat, please do take a couple of minutes. It's only a few questions. It will give us a bit of a sense of how many of you in the room actually want to stay in this conversation with us. And we're working through ways in partnership to make that happen. But from IDS, thanks very much, everybody. Thank you to TDH and everybody who was involved in sharing their practice and thoughts today. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Roy, for making it all happen, and everybody for joining.